where's wokery come from? I mean, we had political correctness. Now, political correctness seems to have taken a load of steroids, and then we've got political correctness gone mad, and it's called wokery. And you wonder, why is this happening now? Why is it suddenly happening? And I think you made the point that the traditional campaigns against repression and oppression, against prejudice against gay people, against trans people, they've all been pretty successful. And it's the warriors who fight these causes who have continued on to something else, to this wokery, whereby we are now blaming people because they had an ancestor 300 years ago who worked in the slave trade or made money from the slave trade. It's a sort of desperate stakes by them to find new causes to fight.
Yeah, I think the way that we need to understand it, and actually the comment made by Reverend Robinson Brown is a good example of how this mentality works. It's working not on individuals, but on discourses. If you look at what he said, he called Captain Tom a kind and generous soul, and he said he would pray for the repose of his soul. He also called the admirers of Captain Tom white British nationalists, essentially. So he is criticising a discourse which he is understanding as white supremacist, which most of us would understand as a simple respect and affection for a really endearing public figure who has a noble history. So there has been a lot of anger at the Reverend, and he also, it seems, has written before in favour of relating queerness to holiness. So this is another very much woke thing, very to do with discourses and breaking down of categories. He's fully within that mentality. But what's disappointed me quite a lot today is that I have seen several people who have rightly argued against cancel culture try to get people to sign a petition to have the Reverend fired for having a bad opinion on Twitter.
Yeah, let's not go down their road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's consistently oppose cancel culture and punishing people for speech. Criticize the ideas that he expressed, and don't try to punish him for having them. That just stifles discussion and it gets us nowhere, and it's unethical.
Yeah, none of us should practice it. I totally agree. I want to talk about Counterweight in a second, but I'd first, Helen, like to address what I just cannot get my head round, how it can be taken seriously when people start to pillory people because they had ancestors 300 years ago that may have made a few quid from the slave trade. How on earth can someone in the 21st century be blamed for what someone in the 17th or the 18th century did? How are we even giving this nonsense the time of day? How have we allowed this to become normal discourse? This country's gone crazy, hasn't it?
I think we're less crazy than America, but there certainly is far too much credibility given to this kind of generational guilt. And sometimes you'll even hear people say something like, well, men oppressed women for hundreds of years and now they expect us to respect them. Well, no man has been alive for hundreds of years. All of us have an equal number of male and female ancestors. This doesn't make very much sense at all. But I think this is a tribal instinct that we have. We, as humans, we have this tendency to feudalism, to categorizing the in-group and the out-group, and it's something that liberalism largely mitigated. Now, the whole identity politics approach just strengthens that really unpleasant side of human nature, which it doesn't belong in a modern liberal society. We must oppose that.
How did it come to prosper in the academic circles? How is it such a big force in universities? These are emporiums where our finest brains go to work and study. This is where intellectuals are. This is where clever people are. How have the academic circles in this country, how has academia been seduced by this utter nonsense that is wokery?
It's taken a kernel of truth, which is that after the civil rights movements had been successful in decriminalising homosexuality, criminalising discrimination against women and racial minorities, and essentially achieving legal equality, not all of the problems in the world have gone away. There's still racism, sexism, and homophobia. There was attitudes to address. So postmodernism looks at systems of thought and ways of talking about things and attitudes and biases. So this is what the academics have then gone into. Over the succeeding 30 years, it has become increasingly detached from reality, built on itself, to take each step a little bit further. So we had first white privilege, and in the 80s, and then we had white complicity in 2010, and then we had white fragility in 2011. So it's gradually growing from this idea that white people have innate privileges that other people don't have, which in some situations is true, to the idea that all white people are complicit in this, no matter what they as an individual believe about racism. And then to the idea that anybody who disagrees that they're complicit in racism is actually just being fragile and should be ignored. It's a sort of self-sealing system that just doesn't allow for criticism. And as such, it's unfalsifiable, and it shouldn't be credited until it submits itself to the marketplace of ideas and lets us discuss its merits.
Well, it's also moronic. It's ridiculous. And so I'll go back to my question. Why is it prospering in academia, where you would hope that people would have the brains to realize the ludicrous nature of that which it is centering on, that which it is now obsessing on, which is all this stuff that you've just been talking about, which doesn't hold up to proper discussion, really?
So being very intelligent and educated doesn't make you more sensible. It just makes, if you're going to be silly and ridiculous, it just makes you more complicated and sophisticated with it.
Do you think that to an extent that our universities have become like a cult? Somebody said to me, the other thing about intellectual people, very clever people, is they're just as susceptible as anyone else to being seduced by cultism. And in a way, wokery has become a national cult, particularly among the academic classes. Do you think something like that is going on?
I think intellectuals are particularly vulnerable to getting stuck inside ideologies because they live in the world of ideas. I mean, if they are of the humanities, of social sciences, philosophy, hard scientists, not so much. So there is always that tendency for anyone to get sucked into a seductive system that just seems to work really neatly. This idea that society is underlain by these invisible systems of white supremacy, patriarchy, cisnormativity, and all the rest of them, is really a simple and seductive idea that people can then lay over everything and interpret situations through it and feel virtuous and like they're doing good and making problems visible and helping to fix them, when really they're just sort of reading problems that aren't there, and then making it much more difficult to address the ones that actually are.
Helen, you're an author. You've written about social justice, liberal ethics. You've gone into dangerous territory where others may fear to tread, if I may make so bold. Have you suffered any attempts to cancel you? Have you suffered the slings and arrows of wokery personally?
I have some committed stalkers. A couple of them have been worrying. They have caused me to fear for my personal safety, but mostly not. Mostly they're just harmless loons. To a large extent, I am uncancelable because I am quite open with my views. I'm not hiding anything. If anybody accuses me of being a white supremacist, I will simply tell them that they are wrong. And this is where this is where the problem that this is a leftist ideology comes across. I am able to speak out in the way I do because I'm financially independent. I'm not reliant on an employer. This means that really the only people who can criticize this ideology safely are wealthy people. Now, that isn't something that you would expect a left-wing ideology to set up, really. It's I've just been dealing with a case today of a working class man who may be disciplined for saying, among other very sensible and unracist things, that he refused to see black people as anything other than human beings just like him. This is, people can be disciplined for saying this kind of thing, and they don't, they have families, they have homes to afford. It's not right that only privileged people like me and like the social justice activists are able to discuss these issues.
Yeah, I think recently there was a case where an employee objected and refused to go on a critical race theory course to teach him that although white people might not think that they were racist, that they really are. That's that pernicious idea that even though you think you're not racist, secretly you are, and you don't even know it. So that's a good way of saying we've got a real problem with racism because it really exists even though it doesn't. Anyway, this guy objected to having to go on this re-education course principally because he was black. So this is how ridiculous this sort of thing can get. But tell us about Counterweight then. You set this up for the victims of cancel culture, for people who get into this type of trouble you've just been talking about. Have you found that lots and lots of people have been contacting you? What kind of stories have they been telling you?
So, yes, we are getting hundreds of messages a day. Quite often people just want resources or a supportive community, and we can deal with them quite quickly. Other times they need more urgent and special support with a particular case. They have to go to a meeting. They've been called into a disciplinary hearing. They need to defend their disbelief in this particular system of social justice. Or they have to respond to an email. So we can connect them with other people in their profession, with lawyers if we have to, with external sort of bodies, with theoretical advisors, which is essentially me, and we can help them work out an action plan. And we've been largely successful. When we are successful, though, nobody knows we've been involved because we have helped an employee push back the imposition of critical social justice training or policies in their workplace. We have several of our members on diversity, equity and inclusion boards, and they are doing really well at keeping it open to a variety of viewpoints and not just critical social justice ones. It helps that a lot of our members are not white, so that makes it easier to get onto these boards and to address these issues.
Do you think, Helen, is one of the roots of this problem in terms of Counterweight and what you're trying to help these kind of beleaguered employees? Is it that these corporations are cowards? They're corporate cowards, aren't they? That the mere hint of some kind of problem that involves a race issue or a trans issue or a gay issue, they will always buckle. So in other words, we live in the age of the accusation. If I make an accusation against someone, he said a racist word, the corporation will no doubt suspend that person and possibly fire them, even though there's no evidence that they actually said it, or it might just be some kind of mistake. It's a very unforgiving system, isn't it? You know, sometimes people will say things that they instantly regret. Surely we should have the chance to make the odd mistake and apologise. We can't have a world like this, can we?
I certainly think, that the lack of forgiveness is a problem. I was speaking to an American pastor recently who was very pro LGBT rights and racial equality and really quite woke. And she was starting to worry about the harshness and unforgiving nature of this and whether it was compatible with Christianity, which is something that Reverend Robinson Brown should think about.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm afraid you're going to sort of bring out my inner Marxist here, because what we are looking at is a capitalist society. I think it's very unlikely that the CEOs of huge companies genuinely believe in all of these woke ideas, but they are incentivized to adhere to them by their popularity and by the possible financial losses they could accrue if they go against them. And there are calls for boycotts. So I wouldn't say it's as simple as being cowardly. Obviously, people who employ a lot of people don't want their business to suffer, because their employees will suffer as well. But we need to create a culture where they're not incentivized to push this kind of thing. We need to create a culture where people are incentivized to be open to a range of ideas and to frown upon the idea that somebody should be punished for thinking differently to you.
Totally, and to be a bit more human about it, I think. Just before you go, Helen, if anyone needs the excellent service of Counterweight, how do they get in touch? What are the details?
Counterweightsupport.com is where you can find all our contact details and a lot of our information, and we have some accessible videos on YouTube at Counterweight Media.
Well, Helen, you're doing great work. I'm a big fan. Thank you so much for your time. Helen Pluckrose there, editor of Aereo magazine and co-author of Cynical Theories, and also the founder of this excellent organisation, Counterweight. If you've got any problems being cancelled by cancel culture, by woke people, don't forget they're a very small minority, but they make a big noise. But if you've got any problems, contact Counterweight. I'm sure they can help.